Hello, everyone. This is going to be 18.1 through 18.4, an era of change. And we're going to start with the 1960s and what's called the counterculture movement, where one guy, a UC Berkeley leader, Jack Weinberg, said, "Don't trust anyone over 30." And since I'm over 30 and saying this, you can tell I agree with it very much so. So, in the 1960s, young people were starting to speak out more. They were trying new ways of living. They were rejecting the old ways of their parents, especially. This was in things like, they were saying, I want to try new experiences. I don't want to be just a cog in the machine of big businesses. It was tied to a lot of things like anti-war demonstrations, civil rights demonstrations, and it showed what was called a generation gap, which is this misunderstanding and value change between the baby boomers and their parents, basically. So here is an example of one. One of the things they were doing was they were trying new drugs. This is Timothy Leary, who was a promoter of LSD and a counterculture leader who told young people to turn on, tune in, and drop out during this time. So counterculture, basically what is against the norms, could be seen in a lot of new ways. So there's new music, like the British invasion going on. The first of these invaders were the Beatles, who had their first big hit in the early to mid 60s and then moved into sort of weirder experimental music and lifestyles. People tried living in small communes, basically living off the land, sharing goods, sharing possessions, sharing partners occasionally as well. And many tried out new religions, trying out Eastern mysticism, Hinduism, Buddhism. They went to places like Haight-Ashbury in San Francisco and promoted a peace and love lifestyle. Now, the downside of dropping out like this of culture and the sort of counterculture movement is it involved lots of drugs and lots of poverty as well, which by the time we got to the 1970s had sort of lost its glamour. So here are the Beatles in 1964 arriving in America and 1970 in their counterculture lifestyle look. Now here's Haight-Ashbury, sometimes called Hashberry at the time. It was the Times Square of the counterculture movement. Now you can go there and it's sort of like almost like a hippie Disneyland in a way. Now let's look at the women's rights movement as well. Gloria Steinem once said, "A woman without a man is like a fish without a bicycle." Yeah, I'll let you draw your own conclusions from that. Anyway, during this time, there's a new push for what's called feminism, the equality of women to men in all things. We see women like Betty Friedan talking about how women were placed into lives that were unfulfilling, especially in her book, The Feminine Mystique, that, women were in these households and were basically saying, I feel like there's something missing. I've got the husband and the wife and the two kids and the dog and the white picket fence, and why am I feeling so unsatisfied? Betty Friedan also helped to write or to found the National Organization for Women, better known as NOW, a group dedicated to true equality for all women. So here's Betty Friedan. She was calling for a 24-hour women's strike at the time, and she said, if men wanted to join us, fine. If politicians, if political bosses, if mayors and governors wish to discuss our demands, fine. But we will define the terms of the dialogue, and by the time those 24 hours are ended, our revolution will be a fact. So the National Organization for Women worked for the passage of what was called the Equal Rights Amendment, a constitutional amendment that would guarantee gender equality in all things under the law by the Constitution. However, it never quite got there thanks to challenges by people who were against the feminist movement. The effort to stop the ERA was actually led by a woman named Phyllis Schlafly in St. Louis. She was the founder of what is called the Eagle Foundation, and she called women's liberation a total assault on family, on marriage, and on children. So while Betty Friedan is saying that women are being sort of forced into living motherhood inside the house, raising the children, women like Phyllis Schlafly were saying that, this is an okay thing, that, women are meant to be in the household, they are meant to be child rearing, child raising, that is their domain. Eventually, the Equal Rights Amendment was 3 states short of passing. Here is the Equal Rights Amendment, by the way. It says, equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex, and the Congress shall have the power to enforce by appropriate legislation the provisions of this. Here is Phyllis Schlafly, who said, what I am defending is the rights, real rights of women. A woman should have the right to be in the home as a wife and mother. Now, some women thought that the national organization was a little too moderate, and so did their own thing. So there's Gloria Steinem, who helped found Miss Magazine. She was a reporter, freelance writer who went undercover to sort of spotlight sexual harassment at a club run by Playboy magazine. We also see the rise of Title IX during this time. Title IX is part of the Equal or Higher Education Act of 1972, and it said that no one should be excluded from educational opportunities based on gender. Nowadays, when we hear about Title IX, they're often referenced in when we're talking about college athletics. So here's Gloria Steinem, who said, the truth will set you free, but first it will piss you off. And here is some evidence that Title IX did help to get more women a better education, so it's not just about sports. Now, in 18.3, expanding the push for equality, Cesar Chavez said, the preservation of one's own culture does not require contempt or disrespect for other cultures. So in the 1960s, we start to see immigration from Central and South America coming up into North America. It was influenced by the civil rights movement. There was also a Latino rights movement during this time. Very influentially, there was Cesar Chavez, who worked for farm labor rights. He helped to form the United Farm Workers, which was the biggest workers for farmers, especially field workers and field hands. The Chicano movement was rising up out of this time as well, with groups like La Raza. They were working to help Latinos remember their history and culture, but also to reduce poverty and discrimination against them as well. So here's Cesar Chavez, who says, we draw our strength from the very despair in which we have been forced to live. We shall endure. And here is some example of Chicano art, including the United Farm Workers flag on the sort of in the middle, upper middle left there. Now, Native Americans were also working for civil rights during this time. They fought against poverty, drug and alcohol abuse, and the fact that they felt ignored by the American government. Two Chippewa activists in 1968 formed the American Indian Movement to help Native Americans both on and off reservations. They worked for nonviolent protest and litigation. They gained more self-control over their lives during this time. So here's the flag of the American Indian Movement. And here is a Native American occupation of Wounded Knee in 1973. Two Native Americans were killed at the end of this occupation. Famously, they also occupied the former prison island of Alcatraz and had a sit-in at the Bureau of Indian Affairs in Washington, D.C. Lastly, let's look at the environmental movement. So, Ronald Reagan at the State of the Union in 1984 said, preservation of our environment is not liberal or a conservative challenge, it's common sense. By the 1960s and 70s, America and the world was starting to better understand just how impactful our actions on the environment were. This included things like toxic waste in our air and water. Sometimes the waste was bad enough that the rivers caught on fire, which I'm pretty sure is not supposed to happen. President Nixon was also a firm advocate for the environment. He created the first Earth Day in April 1970. He also helped to create the Environmental Protection Agency, the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, and the Endangered Species Act, all during his presidency. So here's the Cuyahoga River on fire in 1969, which really is not supposed to happen, I'm almost positive. The government also restricted the use of nuclear power during this time, especially after a nuclear meltdown at a place called 3 Mile Island. No nuclear power plants have been built in America since the 1970s. Some people were calling them as sort of an environmentally friendly alternative to coal and natural gas, but meltdowns are their own problem. Now, also, some people are calling for the opposite to this. They're saying that we shouldn't have environmental regulation because it violates the Fifth Amendment and that it goes against things like private businesses being allowed to do whatever they want to. So this is still a bit of a touchy issue sometimes. Here is 3 Mile Island in Pennsylvania. And here are President and Mrs. Nixon planting a tree on Earth Day.